Hey guys, Brian here from Better Chess Training, and in today's video, I'm going to be going over 10 basic tactics you should know. And I guess because this video is for beginners, I guess we should define what a tactic is. And there's a lot of different definitions out there, but the way I look at it is that tactics are a forced sequence of moves that leads to either a gain of material or some other strategic objective. So the main points there is that it's forced, meaning that your opponent can't avoid it, uh, and we can, that's where we get all our different combinations and calculations and stuff. And it also leads to some type of objective. A lot of times that's going to be the win of a material. For example, if you win a piece, but it could also be things like getting control of a file or trading off a piece with another piece, and maybe you're not winning material, but you're getting other advantages. But the whole point is it's a force sequence that can't be avoided by your opponent. So, with that in mind, we will go into these 10 basic tactics. And by knowing these tactics, you will be able to combine them into different combinations in your games. Okay, the first one we're going to discuss is really the basis of almost all tactics that involve the win of material. And that's counting, or as I'm going to start calling it, overpowering. And the basic idea there is that you have more attackers than your opponent has defenders. And so, for example, in this position, we have two attackers, and we only have one defender. So we're going to win this pawn unless there's an existence of another tactic. But if it's white's turn to move, we are going to win this pawn. So this is pretty basic, but it is, again, sort of the fundamental concept behind almost every other tactic we're going to be talking about. By the way, there are, don't worry too much about the names of tactics. As long as you kind of understand them. I'm trying to use as commonly used terms as possible. But the idea is that once you see the concept, you can start to see them in your games no matter what you call them. Okay, just one more example of this before we move on to the next one. So this is actually from one of my games. And in this position, we can look at this. We have 1, 2, 3 attackers and only 2 defenders. And again, it is white's turn to move, so we are going to win this pawn on d5. So in your games, make sure that you are both offensively and defensively, make sure that you are keeping your pieces and pawns protected. Okay, the second tactic is the double attack. And again, this is one of those foundational tactics. So it's actually takes many forms in terms of other tactical motifs that we're going to be talking about today. But double attack combined with counting, where you have more attackers than defenders, are, I guess, the two basic tactics that lead to almost every other tactic. I think there's only one tactic. Well, in any case, there's, let me show you this variation here. So in this case, and the main idea is that you have 2 targets. And in this case, we could use the queen to attack both at the same time. Now, this, of course, is another tactic called a fork. But the idea is that we have 2 targets. Now, after the king moves, we're going to take. Now, it doesn't just have to be one piece that's doing the attacking. So if we look in this position, it's black's turn to move. And again, we have 2 targets. If we move this bishop here, we have this rook is being attacked and this knight is being attacked. Actually, in this particular position, we have another double attack. Actually, move that forward here. And that is this one here, where we're actually attacking the king with the bishop and the knight with the rook. So 2 targets, and this time we're using 2 pieces to attack, but they're both double attacks. And many of these other tactics that we're going to be seeing are some form of double attack. Okay, our next tactic is the pin. And I actually did another video on this a few years ago, so I'll put a link to that in the description below that goes into a little more detail with more examples. But basically, there's 2 types of pins. And if you could think of a like a bulletin board, and then you're pinning something to something else. And that's what this is. In this case, it's black's turn to move. If we move our bishop here, the bishop cannot move because, or I'm sorry, the rook cannot move because otherwise it would put the king in check. And of course, we can't do that. So this is called an absolute pin, meaning you cannot move the piece that um, you cannot move the piece that's being pinned because the king is the other piece in line with the piece. Okay, so that's an absolute pin. There's another type of pin called a relative pin, where, and in this case, we see this bishop here is attacking the knight, and behind the knight is the queen. Because the queen isn't the king, the knight can move, but it's probably a bad idea. So, like if I move, actually, it's white's turn to move here. But let's say I made a move here with white. Black can move this knight, but then I would be able to capture the queen and have a big advantage. So in this particular case, we can actually, because it's a bad idea to move this knight, we can actually attack this knight with this pawn. And then after, I guess we can attack the bishop here, but if we attack with the pawn, now the black is forced to reply if he doesn't want to have his queen taken. So he takes back with the b pawn, and then this bishop can back up. And now this pawn is pinned. Okay, so that's a relative pin because the piece that is being pinned can move, but in this particular case, it's not a good idea. Okay, our next basic tactic is removal of the defender. So in this particular position, so basically the idea is we are getting rid of the defender of one of our opponent's pieces, and then if we go back to counting, we are now attacking that piece. So in this case, the knight is defending this rook, which is being attacked. And in this particular case, we can take of course, if we take the rook right away, then the knight will take back. Now, of course, in this particular position, that's still probably good for black or for white. But in this case, if we take the knight first here with check, the king is forced to move, and now we can win this rook. So this is the first type of removal of defender where you destroy or destruction of the defender. There's two other types, which I'm going to show you. One is called chasing away the defender. So in this particular position, this is a theoretical endgame, and one of the mistakes that black can make is to take this this pawn here. And instead of, it looks like the king is defending this rook, but if we give the king a check, this king is forced away from the rook, and then we are able to win the rook. So that's chasing away the defender. And another little variation on that is luring away the defender or deflecting the defender. So in this case, it's white's turn to play, and he's attacking his queen. Now, in this particular case, and maybe this isn't the greatest example, if we take here and black were to take, we actually have checkmate. But if that weren't the case, we can play this rook check. Because the rook has to take back, it is no longer defending the queen, and now we can win the queen. So that's luring away the defender. And these removal of the defender tactics are tricky to see sometimes, but now that you know that they exist, you can try to make sure that you don't fall for it on the defensive side, as well as looking for opportunities from the offensive side. Our next tactic is the fork, and this is a type of double attack where one piece attacks more than one piece. And I think most of the pieces can deliver forks, and I'm going to show you an example of that. So let's take a look here. There's a knight fork here. If the white knight goes here, we attack both the king and the rook. So after the king moves, we win the rook. Okay. We also have bishop forks here. We're attacking, again, both pieces. Doesn't always have to be the king on the one end, but it makes it very effective a lot of times. we have here a rook fork, where we're attacking two pieces with the rook. Here we have a queen fork, and here we're attacking this rook and the king. And then finally, we have here a king fork. And so it does look, normally bishop, knight, and king can checkmate a king. But in this particular case, because the king's too far away, we can actually attack both the bishop and the knight at the same time. And since they can't protect each other, one of them is going to be lost, and then that would be a draw. So that's a fork. Pawns could also fork, but didn't create an example for that. Let's move on to the next tactic. Okay, our next tactic is discovered attack. And discovered attack is pretty straightforward. Basically, it means moving one of our pieces so that the piece behind can attack one of your opponent's pieces. Okay, so in this particular case, we see here that this rook and this queen are lined up together, and we can use the discovered attack in combination with some of our other tactics, and this is where, again, it also often becomes a double attack. For example, here, if we play our knight here to d2, then our rook is attacking the queen as well as the knight attacking the rook. So after the queen moves, for example, let's say the queen moves here to protect the rook, we can win the exchange. Okay? So that is one type of discovered attack. Let me show you another example. Here in this position, we're going to use a discovered attack. And so in this case, this bishop is lined up with the opponent's rook and king. So we're actually going to have a discovered attack that turns into a pin. So if we move our knight over here, and in this particular case, maybe white will protect the rook, but the rook is more valuable than the bishop, so we win some material. Okay, our next tactic is the discovered check. And this is a cousin to the discovered attack, but I thought it would be appropriate to make it its own tactic since it involves the king and a check. So in this case, when we move the piece out of the way so that the other piece can attack, we're going to be giving check, which offers us some other opportunities. So in this case, we actually have a double attack with bishop to e3 check, and the rook is attacking the king, and the bishop is attacking the queen. In this case, the queen can block, but we are going to win material, and in this particular position, the game as well. The discovered check also has a variation that's very powerful called the double check. And this is where not only are we checking with the piece that is being discovered, but we're also checking with the other piece. And that, again, allows us some opportunities because black cannot block both checks at the same time. So he needs to either move out of the way, basically needs to move out of the way. So in this case, this is actually, I believe this is called Morphy's mate. And here, we can't just do a discovered check like this where we play rook to g1 check because black can block with this pawn. But we can do a double check with rook to g8 check. And we're checking with the bishop, we're checking with the rook, so we cannot block the bishop. So we have to take the rook, and in this case, we have rook to g1, which is checkmate, but that was only made possible because of the double check. Okay, our next tactic is the skewer. Actually, tactics number 8 and number 9 are very similar, but the skewer is, if you think of like a shish kebab where you put like the meat and the vegetables on a stick, it's kind of like that. Now, this is very similar to the pin, but the distinction is with a pin, and let's just go back real quick to our pin example. With a pin, um, the more valuable piece is in the back. So we attack the piece here. With the skewer, in this position, the more valuable piece is in the front. So the idea is we attack the more valuable piece, and then when that moves out of the way, we're able to win the other piece. Okay, so in this case, with white to move, we play rook to h8, and so here is the skewer, and so the queen has to move out of the way, and then we can win the knight. Okay, our second example here is a common endgame trap, and in this case, this white pawn is, or this black pawn is getting ready to promote, so we take it with the rook, but now again we have that skewer tactic here, where we are attacking the king, and through the king we are attacking the rook. So the king has to move out of the way, and then we win the rook. Okay, the next tactic is the X-ray. And actually, some people look at the X-ray and the skewer as interchangeable, but I'm going to introduce kind of one way that I delineate them. And in this case, what is happening is, yes, we do have, I guess technically we have a skewer, um, and or like a pin. It's really just one way to look at how the tactic is executed. So in this case, it's white's turn to play. If we just take the queen, then black can simply take back. But we can actually take the rook first, and this rook is protected by the queen, which what I would say via X-ray. So that's how I delineate X-ray from skewer. But if you want to interchange what they're called, I'm not going to argue with you. Okay, here's another example of that. This concept of the X-ray. So in this case, it's white's turn to move, and here we have our target, which is this pawn. If we just take the bishop, this pawn is going to be able to move up, and now we're not going to be able to attack it, at least not right away. But we can actually win the pawn here with by taking with the knight, because the knight is protected, is X-rayed by the bishop. So if the bishop takes, then we take back as well. So that's the X-ray, very similar to the skewer. Some people interchange the two terms and find what works for you. Okay, our final tactic for today is trapping. And trapping consists of restricting the movement of your opponent's pieces so that basically you're going to win material or somehow obtain some strategic end. So here's a basic position, and it's black to move. And we can see here that this knight, of course, the knight can go in many different places. But if we use this bishop and put it right here, we can actually cover all of the squares that the knight can go to. So white brings his king over because his knight, if it moves, it's going to get captured. And then we're going to capture the knight. Okay, let's take a look at another one. This, it's black to move in this position. And actually, this is a very well-known trap. I believe it's called like the Jacob's Ladder trap. There's a combination in like the Roy Lopez. I've actually got caught in it myself. But with black to move here, we can trap this bishop with the pawn. So his own pawns are trapping him. And then here, of course, we can't go anywhere. So white is going to lose this bishop for a pawn. And finally, I want to show you another kind of well-known trap. And in this case, the queen grabbed this pawn here on b2, the so-called poison pawn. And as anyone who plays the Najdorf or plays the Open Sicilian against the Najdorf knows, this is typically a big no-no, especially once this pawn here is on a3. So knight to a4, and all of the squares that the queen can escape to are covered. So the queen is trapped. Probably needs to trade with this rook here, but white has a big advantage at this point. So that is trapping. So always look to trap your opponent's pieces, as well as make sure that your own pieces don't get trapped. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that. Those were 10 basic tactics, and most of the other tactics you will learn in advanced courses and books are based off of these and maybe some others. So this is just a start. Down below in the description, there are some books that I recommend for beginners to reinforce and practice these tactics. So check those out. Make sure you hit the like button if you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you soon.